Iscariot Chapter 3. Iscariot opened his dreary eyes. The morning was still dark, and only the earliest of creatures was stirring. He lay there looking up at his ceiling, his mind void and yet in tangled webs. He removed the covers and went to check on his son, who was resting at the foot of his bed. Silent, he slept as Iscariot leaned over him. He watched and listened as his son breathed in and out. It put a rare smile on Iscariot's face to see his son healthy, knowing he had nothing to fear. He watched him sleep a little while longer, as he did not want to go back to sleep himself. The nightmares had been wicked the past few nights. Dreams of demons and abominable beasts, others of his wife trying desperately to tell him something but always vanishing before she could speak the words. He struggled mightily to keep his eyes open as his head bounced up and down, falling in and out of consciousness. He finally rested his head on the back of the chair he'd been sitting in, and his mind took him back to the Battle of Erbil. Iscariot looked up in the night sky, examining the stars, wondering what mysteries they held. Why did God put these in the sky for us to see? What are we to look for? And when we find the answer, what are we to do with it? He thought. When he looked back down to earth, the night had turned to day. The sky was cloudless and bluer than the purest sea. The desert sands whipped around him, as did the bullets of his enemy. His breathing was heavy and rapid, and as he glanced over to his right, Iscariot watched his friend die as he was struck in the head by the speed and the might of a specialized armor-piercing bullet. His friend's body landed hard, and the red sands became richer as they absorbed the blood that seeped through his helmet. Beams of light flashed by him and crumbled the walls that were to his left. Iscariot radioed his team.
"This is Alpha 2. The captain is dead. We are outnumbered 2-1. Charlie and Delta teams need to engage the enemy head-on. What remains of Alpha will flank the enemy's right. Charlie 1, do you acknowledge?" "Charlie team confirmed," was the response that came through. "Delta team status?" he asked. "Delta confirmed. What of Bravo?" questioned the Delta leader. "Delta has been eliminated. We are all that is left," Iscariot answered. "Roger that," the Delta team leader responded. Delta and Charlie teams laid down suppressive fire as Iscariot gathered the rest of his comrades. The group had started with 20 men, and only 7 remained. Iscariot and his team used the fallen walls and large debris as cover as they moved across the battlefield. The bullets buzzed and lasers seared as the bombs cratered the ground around them. The blue sky turned to purple, pink, and orange, and small lights appeared far in the distance. Among the stars in the sky were Mongnolarian warplanes that spiraled in the heavens with the air force of Saoirse, the Lolas, whose symbol was the eagle. They bore the wings of freedom. He watched as one of the Eolars struck a Mongnolarian plane with a tracer missile. It fell to the earth in a screaming frenzy, and the smoke trail streaked across the sky, blotting out the beauty of the twilight. "Take cover!"
Iscariot yelled to his troops. The plane was hurtling towards them. The yell of the burning aircraft became deafening as it got closer to his team, and then, like the roar of thunder, it hit the ground and shattered across the small desert town, missing Iscariot and his men by only 100 yards. The bulk of the enemy force was now in sight, and Iscariot could see that Charlie and Delta teams had had success pushing forward and furthering their advance. In front of him now were soldiers that looked like creatures of the dead, whose helmets were spiked and whose faces looked like skulls. Their eyes were oil black and their appearance was menacing. Any attack on their body was without effect. To kill them, they had to be struck in the head, and for this reason were given the name Scolastiori, meaning headmaster. Fighting alongside the Scolastiori were Mongnolarian soldiers whose skin, when exposed, illuminated a golden colour. Their eyes were without irises, but when looked upon seemed to penetrate your soul. Their armour, made of a pure alien metal, was tight and form-fitting. It seemed almost fluid. Attached on the arms of their armour were guns that fired energy beams generated by their own bodies. Some were even equipped to generate shields. Iscariot readied his men to engage the enemy, and then gave the order to execute. Ray cannons and energy rifles echoed through the empty alleys. Bullets rang and thudded as they struck above and below Iscariot and his men. The day was now night, and flashes of light bolted through the black sky. Delta and Charlie teams of 40 men were now 10. Iscariot watched as the men he commanded took their final breaths, said their last words, and fired their shots that would ring for their eternity. He took a deep and composed breath. The light from the tracers lit his black and silver metallic armour. He donned his silver helmet, which was of 2 parts. The faceplate was of a silver man, void of emotion, expressionless. Atop his head, protecting his skull and neck, was the image of a silver leon. Its fearsome 2-inch fangs hung from the helm and met at Iscariot's brow. He roared with rage as he ran out into the field of blood and war. His armour gave him speed he wouldn't have without it, and it gave him strength he could only imagine. He charged at speeds like the howling wind, as Scolastiori and Monglerian soldiers fired upon him. His shots were pure and precise as he battled for his life and for the lives of those he had lost. From 12 to 11, then from 11 to 10, the enemy began to fall. Soon only 5 remained, and as he got closer to his foe, his gun was struck from his hands, and then he was hit again, struck on his armoured shoulder, which looked like the paw of a lion with 3-inch claws. Iscariot fell to the ground from the impact of the shot. He could see his opposers approaching as he lay there in agony. He waited for them as his soul fell into the desert sands, until finally a Scolastiori soldier hovered over him. His enemy unsheathed his sword that was strapped behind him. His face, like death, seemed to smile, knowing that this was going to be Iscariot's final moment. The soldier placed 2 hands on his sword and angled it down to strike Iscariot from the earth. As he lifted up to add force to his swing, Iscariot uncloaked a dagger from his armour and buried into the Scolastiori's leg. His yell rumbled through the night air, and the soldier fell to his knees, trying to strike Iscariot as he crashed to the earth. His blade had missed, and Iscariot seized the moment. He rose from certain death. The blood trickled down his armour towards his breastplate that possessed an emblem of the head of a roaring golden lion. The ember glow in the eyes of Iscariot's helm perforated into the black holes of his enemies. He pulled his sword from behind his back and quickly struck the neck of the Scolastiori, severing its head from its body. In blind rage, Iscariot pursued the remaining 4 soldiers. He quickly found his next target and leapt into the air, tackling a Monglerian soldier and penetrating its armour with his sword. He briskly removed the sword from the soldier's body and hurled it at another, puncturing his helmet and infiltrating the skull. He picked up the rifle that was next to him and fired the remaining shot, striking another warrior in his throat. Iscariot found his final victim and sprinted towards him, and as fast as his suit made him, he could not help his fellow Leon soldier as he watched him die in the arms of his enemy. The Scolastiori warrior turned to defend himself against Iscariot, but his throat was already clutched by Iscariot's forceful hand. He had him pinned against the debris of a fallen warplane and began applying pressure to the airways of his enemy. The warrior struggled to breathe, kicking and clawing at Iscariot, desperately trying to live. Iscariot pushed harder on the soldier's throat until he heard the sound of his neck collapsing. Iscariot yelled in rage, as he was all that remained of the horrid battle he had just endured. He collapsed to his knees, with tears streaming down his face, and thought of all the friends he had just lost. His eyes were blurred, his face a mask of sweat, blood, and dirt. He looked skyward and saw a silver flash speeding towards him. Boom! Iscariot woke back into the blackness of his room, with Hans sleeping quietly in his bassinet. He looked outside his bedroom window as God painted with streaks of lightning across the night sky. He did not sleep the rest of the night, but instead watched the spectacle of lights dancing in the darkness as the snow coiled in the wind. Iscariot grinned, for he knew the reign of his father was over, and maybe, just maybe, he'd be chosen as king of the free world.